Be back. It's good to be back from Berlin, from Prague, from Pressburg, from Budapest, and to be learning Torah together with the Olam, a really interesting topic, very much Lamaisa, which is the topic of Tochacha, one of the three main places in Shas where the sugya appears is right here in our Gemara in Shabbos in the 5th parak. And we are going to focus on a topic which unfortunately I've had to deal with several times. I'm not saying I have the perfect solution. What is the best mahalach? Honestly, I think each case needs its own mahalach, but sometimes you and I find ourselves in a situation where we are confronted, for example, with a student that we have a kesha with, he or she eventually go their own way, or sometimes not even going their own way, they're retaining that kesher, and then we find that they're dating seriously as someone who is not Jewish, and you realize that you are watching under your own watch, an intermarriage is about to happen. So what do? They're in love. Nothing is more powerful than love, and you're supposed to come in and break up that relationship. It's not going to work. It's going to backfire against you. On the other hand, to do nothing, you are watching the ultimate catastrophe. Just a few generations ago, people used to sit shiver for their children for doing exactly this. I got a psak from my Rebbe, Rav Shapiro, when it was a family member that we should break up Hulk Sharm. In that particular case, it was the right psak. In other cases, he would have said to maintain a kesha. What exactly is the right approach? So we're not going to give an answer. We're going to show the Mara Makamis and a Mahalach, and then as Hashem Yisbrach, Hashem should save us from this Nisayan, but at least we'll have the Torah Shabbai, we'll know the Torah of how to deal with such a situation. I just wanted to say that when I started preparing the Sugya, I found in my Beis Medrash, I prepared the Shurim in Rabbi Reuben's Beis Medrash, and I've forgotten the name, B'nai Torah, Kahal B'nai Torah, I think we're called, on Rehov Agassi here in Hanof. That's where the terrible massacre happened several years ago. I found a series of Sfarim called V'ahavta L'Reacha, and there was one volume on the mitzvah of Tochacha, a whole volume on the mitzvah of Tochacha. I wrote down over here, it has 346 pages just on this one mitzvah of Tochacha. Who was the author? Someone I did not know, Reb David Aryav. I asked my chavrusa, Reb Heshi, who is this fellow, Reb David Aryav, that can write almost 400 pages, 350 pages on Tochacha? He says he sits 3 rows in front of us. He pointed to us. He'd been there all along, this person, this massive masmid, an Israeli fellow. And I actually asked him a few questions connected to the share. The bottom line is, this is a huge topic, so we're going to be laser focused on the sugya on Shabbos. But first of all, I just wanted to say a few introductory words about the psukim in Parshas Kedeshim. You should know that many, many years ago, I was invited to come to the national staff meeting of NCSY. They asked me to choose a topic. Those were the days when I was the keynote speaker. They asked me to choose a topic, and I chose a topic called the 10 Commandments of KIRUV. I made up the number 10. It could be 12, 13, but it just sounded good, 10 Commandments of KIRUV. What I did is I went through the Chumash and identified all the psukim where someone big says this is a Torah positive commandment to do the mitzvah of KIRUV. So it's incredible. And there's probably much more than 10, but it sounded cool, the 10 Commandments of KIRUV. Yeah, this is a very cool topic. One of them was our pasuk over here of Techiach. It makes so much sense. Anyone that is a professional in KIRUV, on a deeper level, he's a professional in Tochacha. That's basically what you're being paid to do. Your mitzvah is the mitzvah of Tochacha. What I want to show you is that you have 3 psukim in Parshas Kedeshim. So we're still technically speaking, Achrimos Kadeshim Emma, we're a week and a half away, which is still basking in that parsha from 2 weeks ago. But the bottom line is there's 3 psukim over there, which describes what is a Jewish society supposed to look like. Not focusing on the Rabbanim and the Dayanim, and talking about peer society. So you have 3 psukim. Let me just read them to you. You all know these psukim by heart. Leiselech rachel ba'amecha, leisamad al dam re'echa, ani Hashem, leisisna es achicha b'lvavecha, hecheach techiach es amisecha, leisis olav chet, and then finally leisakim, leisatir es b'nei amecha, v'ahavta l're'echa kamecha, ani Hashem. Those 3 psukim, probably about 10 mitzvahs I say in those 3 psukim. I'm not exactly sure. I saw the Orach Chaim addresses this a little bit, but intrigued me when I wrote this out in my notes over here. You have Leiselech Rachel Ba'amecha. That's all. The whole Sefer Chafetz Chaim is written on this. Ba'amecha. Leisamad al dam re'echa. Leisisna es achicha b'vavecha. Hecher techich es amisecha. So you have Am, Rea, Ach, and Amisecha. And then finally, the last pasuk, Leisakim Leisat es b'nei amecha. So what exactly is the difference between this? I do not know. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh talks about the difference in achicha and amisecha, but the bottom line is that you see that the mitzvah of tochacha is surrounded with obligations to take care of your fellow Jew. Everything obviously has to come from a deep, deep conviction of love. And I want to share with you that there's a Sefer HaChinuch, Siman Reish Lamed Tes, meaning on the mitzvah of Tochacha, where he adds the following words. Very interesting what he writes. It's venerally, the Chiyuv HaTochacha, one of them, okay, let me just get reading glasses. That stage, I'm sorry. Reading glasses time, apologize, okay. Sefer HaChinuch writes, the chutz me'asezu, outside of this asay called hecher techicha, oid mischayev lois asay. So there's an asay in KIRUV called hecher techiach. There's a lois asay in KIRUV called leisamid al dam re'echa, right? Meaning delay gara mi teveh benahar va'eva al leisamid. And so what happens is, chas v'shalom, someone is drowning. You have a mitzvah of lisamid al dam re'echa. The Gam HaShivese brings a pasuk which you could throw into your list of mitzvahs of returning a lost object. L'rabbis avedas gufay. You have to return a lost object of a human body. Alachas kama v'kama dim yachal atzila me'avera du ha'avedas nafshay v'gufay rechman litzlam v'badei chayiv lachzir l'mutzav. So the Sefer Chinuch, and by the way, I have over here in my footnotes, the Marshdam, which I think lived before the Sefer Chinuch in Yeridea, in Siman Reish Yudalad already brings this down. And I saw the same thing in the Shla, right over here on our pasuk, the Shla on the Parsha, quote, the Mischayev Batzalas Haguf, Koshkin Batzalas Nafshay, the Im Yerena, Oive Chas V'Shalom Avera, Ma'abed Eilamoy. This is a strong language of the Shla. Ma'abed Oilama, you're a person seeing who's destroying his whole future life, which is forever and ever and ever. Yatzilenu, you have a mitzvah to save him. So, L'samd al dam re'echa is a loisase. You can't stand by when you see a fellow Jew who is basically destroying his own life. So, this means the life that is not just the physical life of committing suicide, Hashem Yirachem, but his future life, which is forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You can't just stand idly by. It's a Torah mitzvah and a Torah leisase that you cannot stand idly by. It's incredible. I'm looking who's here. Shalom Rabdani. This is Mamish. I'm speaking over here to the preaching to the choir over here. But when I get an opportunity and I speak Barabim to Balabatim in America, I tell them I don't understand. Within walking distance from where we are, there are literally thousands of Jewish neshamas that are in spiritual suicide mode, and we have mitzvos to go and do something, not lisam damriacha. We can't just stand by idly. And similarly, heicheach techiach. So the question is how to go about it. And that's where the word KIRUV professional, okay, we're professional, but honestly, professional just means that you're using your common sense and you know the basic halachas and you have basic ability to love and respect and not judge a fellow Jew. So go out and do KIRUV, go out and do what needs to be done. Give tochacha and don't stand by on the blood of your fellow Jew. So now we're ready. We've set the tone, hopefully, for the Gemara in front of us. If you have your Shabbos open, it's Daf Nun Daled Amud Aleph is where it begins. It's really the Mishnah. Nun Daled Amud Beis. At the top of the page is the Mishnah. Just to give you some background, we are learning Masechah Shabbos. The sugya of Tichacha comes tangential to a Mishnah that talks about Shvisas Behemtecha, which means if you own a cow, for example, you have an obligation that your animal keeps Shabbos. Okay, as the pasuk says, we say in Kiddush, right? Leman yenuach sharcha v'chamarcha, that your shar and your chamar, your ox and your donkey, should also keep Shabbos. So comes along the pasuk over here. Comes along the Mishnah over here and tells us that in general, Adam chayv al shitas behemtai. A person is obligated in the shvis of his behema, that's one thing. And also that your animal is allowed to go out with a malbush, meaning if you're living in California and your poodle needs a fancy schmancy outfit, so that's 100% permitted. Or if you need something for its shmira, its own protection. So those things are permitted me'ikad din and Shabbos. Welcome, Reb Nati. It's a chus to have you join us over here. The bottom line is that the Mishnah comes along and says the following things. So, by the way, so what is forbidden? It's forbidden for your animal to go out wearing a masa, a burden that is not necessary for the animal itself. So the animal cannot carry for you. That is an issa d'oraisa from this pasuk of Leman Yenuach. So comes along the Mishnah and Nun Daled Amud Beis. Absolutely fascinating story. You have a look, just one line before the Gemara at the very beginning of Nun Daled Amud Beis brings down a story. Harasai shel Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the heilige cow of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Hisayetze b'ritzua shebein karnah, would go out with a ritzua, some kind of a leather strap that went between its horns, shaloi b'rtzein chachamim, against the will of the chachamim. So if we would just learn the Mishnah, it seems to be that once upon a time, Elazar ben Azariah owned a cow, and he had a machlekes with all the rabbanim of his generation. He held that the ritzua between the horns of his donkey was a tachshit. It makes the animal beautiful. And the rabbanim hold, no, it's a masu. It is a masu. It is a burden, and they disapproved of the way that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was acting. Okay, beautiful machlekes about the ritzua between the horns of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Comes the Gemara and says, you got the narrative all wrong. This is not what happened at all. So if you have a look over here, you see at the bottom of the page, it gets wide, and there the Gemara brings down something shocking. Parasai shel Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, says the Gemara, v'chada para havelei. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah owned a cow. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah owned one cow. V'amar Rav, v'amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, Treisa alfi egle havi meiser Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah mi edri kol shata v'shata. So this is crazy, by the way, because again, I don't know how to deal with huge numbers when the Gemara says it. My Rebbe used to say it's a machlokas between the Gra and the Maharal. The Gra would say that you have to be teirach to learn these things literally. And the Maharal would immediately say that these numbers, especially you have the number 120 over here, these are, so to speak, symbolic numbers. Doesn't make any difference. If you have 12 120,000 cows are your meiser every single year. 1/10, which means that every year he would have 120,000 cows giving birth to little eglos, and then you had the mitzvah of meiser behema, however that worked after the Beis Hamikdash was over. The bottom line is he was massively wealthy, extremely, extremely wealthy. I'm imagining that this was the tkufa when he was nasi, as you'll see in a moment. And the bottom line is that what does it mean? He had a cow. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had a cow. It says the Gemara. No, it was not a cow. It says shel shchentai haisa. It belonged to his neighbor. Shelo michaba, because he did not. It wasn't meicha nikra al shemai. It's named after Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. This is very shocking. His neighbor had a cow. The cow went around with a ritzua between its horns. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, number one, he himself paskined it was okay. But the Chachamim said, no, it's not okay. So he had an obligation to say, my own opinion, I can do my own home. But for you, I have to tell you what you're doing is wrong. You have to listen to the Chachamim. Now, keep in mind as well that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is the Tana that we're going to learn in a few minutes' time that says the following words. Okay, this is the Gemara that we're going to read in a moment. I have to just keep putting it. Okay, it's a new tkufa in my life. I'm in denial that I need reading glasses. Okay, the Gemara brings down that this is the Gemara that we're about to quote. It says, "Timienihi im yesh bedar zeh shirdeh lechiach." It's a Gemara in the Seita that you guys are doing in Daf Yomi. I would be shocked, says Rabbi Elazar, if there's someone that knows how to give Tochacha. So he held already then, after the Churban, that it was not possible to give Tochacha, already at that kufa over there. And the interesting thing is that the Yerushalmi brings down that it wasn't even his neighbor. His neighbor is a euphemism for his own wife. So it's his wife, and it's named after him. Ki'ilu, he's responsible for this para. He's the one that says we don't know how to give Tochacha anymore. And he's the one that says that I personally think is 100% permitted. And yet, and this opens up the sugya of Tochacha. You, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, are the nasi of the dar. You have to take achrayas. You have to go and give Tochacha. You cannot sit idly by when, according to the chacham of your dar, so your neighbor or your wife is over an issa d'oraisa. It's not one of the lamates malachas, but it's an issa d'oraisa, a shvisas behemtecha. Okay, what happens next in the Gemara? The Gemara goes on and says the following things. So let's read this together. The Gemara says, quote, Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chaviva. So you have over here, these four Rabbanim are about to tell us the following story. Then you have a square brackets. Masna v'kula d'seida moed kol ki hai zuga chalif Rabbi Yochanan ma'al Rabbi Yonasan. He says, by the way, whenever you have these four mentioned in order, we have a tradition, take out Rabbi Yochanan, put in Rabbi Yonasan, shkoyach. Kol mi she'esha limchais la'anshi beisai, anyone who has the ability to give Tochacha and does not, v'loi micha nitfas al anshi beisai, v'anshi irai nitpas al anshi irai, v'kol ha'olam kulai nitpas al kol ha'olam kulai. So, and then Amrapapa v'hani debei reish kulusai nitpasu al kol alma. So, by the way, before I translate this, Rashi says kol ha'olam kulai, kol ha'olam kulai, geshet sarma. What does it mean, kol ha'olam kulai? So Rashi, the kol Yisrael. It's just kol Yisrael. Kigain melech v'nasi. One, she'ef shalei limchais, shirei mipanav. Two, umekayim dvarav. So we're talking about someone who is kol ha'olam kulai is Eretz Yisrael. Someone who's a melech or a nasi that can make a mecha, and people will listen. When you've got those two things, so at that point, then you have an obligation to come along and to make a mecha. David Shulman asked the question, is Tochacha reprimanding or proving to your friend, or reprimanding through proving? I'm not exactly sure what your question is. You can speak up, David. Are you asking is whether you have to give Mara Makamis exactly?
Meaning, what's the definition of hochacha? Like, does it mean like just like reprimanding when the person does wrong? Like hochacha doesn't it also mean like proving, like a proof?
So okay, so one of the things that I was not going to discuss, just because I'm not going to have time, is whether or not there's a difference between tochacha and mecha. So I actually discussed this with this Reb Aryav, and he said, I told him what he had written in the Sefer, and he says, halacha l'maisa, it's extremely unclear. Our Gemara over here uses the two phrases interchangeably. Mecha does not mean Mara Makavis. Mecha means when the simple mecha means you go out and you just scream that this is aser, and that's it. Tochacha has to be done with the mahalach. So again, it depends on the situation. If you're the Rav of the city, you don't have to prove yourself to your people. You say this is forbidden. They say it's their problem to find where you got it from. You don't have to do it. If you are giving a tochacha to your peer, or you're telling your friend that what he's doing is wrong, so it would be respectful that he should know where you're coming from. You say, this is aser. You tell him, you know this is aser because. Also, sometimes tochacha doesn't need any proof whatsoever. I have had my neighbor who loves me to pieces. I love him to pieces. He told me off because he saw me coming back from the mikveh too close to Shkia. And he said, Menachem, what's going on over here? Dude, Shabbos is coming. Like, okay, get on with it. So that is classic tochacha that doesn't need a maramakom. I know full well that he's right, and just he shook me up. Sometimes you see your friend doing something inappropriate. He knows it's inappropriate. You call him out on it. That's all tochacha. That's all the classic tochacha between us. Amisecha, your friend, you give tochacha. They see them doing something stupid, and you know that you love them, and the whole thing is done based on ava. And I'm not going to go through this because this is not our sugya, but we're going to quote. There's a lot of psukim in Mishlei. Gabi techacha, and the chacham loves techacha. The chacham loves it. I always say, I have three grown-ups in my life. I had my Rebbe Rav Shapiro, I have my Rebbitzin, my wife, all giving me techacha freely, and a third one is I have a best friend. So whatever, some of you know Reb Zev Ravman. So these people are very open, and they tell me what I'm doing wrong, and I'm extremely, extremely appreciative. Reb Dave Chaim. Now we're talking the opposite. Our Gemara is saying about the achrayus, that you have an obligation, number one, on your family, if you can, on your city, number three, on your whole country. If you are a leader of Klal Yisrael, you have a tremendous, tremendous achrayus. Not only that, the Gemara is about to say that you are nitpas, that if you don't do a tochacha, then you are a full partner to everything they do, which is extremely, extremely scary. This is something that Al Pi Kabbalah, I saw it brought down. I wasn't going to mention this with Al Pi Kabbalah, that you can get their broader averis as well if you don't give tochacha. It's brought down in Kabbalah that if the person is a rasha to your tochacha, so you get his chusim, all kinds of interesting things, Al Pi Kabbalah, in the midst of tochacha. But this is a huge achrayus that we have, that God forbid that you shouldn't go up to Shemayim and find out that you are going to receive einish in the places where you could have given tochacha and you could have been effective, and you did not do this. This is something that we don't talk about enough, the achrayus that we have for our fellow Jews. We don't want to go up to Shemayim and see hundreds of people coming out in Shemayim and saying, where was this KIRUV professional? Why didn't he knock on my door? My son told me, David Meir, who is friendly with Ramesha Freilich, he lives in South Florida today. He does KIRUV with Israelis. He told me that when he first started working for Lev Lachim, or whatever, one of the organizations, and he used to go to neighboring towns. He lived in Elad, and he would knock on doors So one of the people said to him, "Why did it take you so long to knock on my door?" This was an open-minded Ashkenazi who was excited to learn more about his Yadus. He says, "Why did you not knock upon my door?" So there's answers to this. I mean, there are heterim, but the general mahalach is that you have to, like you wrote, like a Kain Gadol is the murderer. It's considered like it's a very, very, very parallel idea. So let's go weiter. I want to show you something very, very specific. If you can go to Nun Hey Amud Aleph, just because I want to finish all my material over here. If you can go a few lines down, you look at Nun Hey Amud Aleph. The Gemara brings down a story. I'm just going to read. I'm going to read the Gemara very quickly just to get to it. The second line of Nun Hey Amud Aleph. Rabbi Yehuda Aviyasif Kamei Deshmuel Asahi Itita Katsavcha Kamei. So Rabbi Yehuda was sitting in front of Shmuel. A woman calmly started shouting. He ignored her. You hear a person crying and you ignore them. It says, Gamhu Yikra v'layane. So you're in trouble. Amalei Shinana, smart one. Reishcha B'Kiriri, your leader, meaning me. B'Kiriri, I'm in cold water. Reisha de Reishcha, but my leader, B'Chamimi, he's in hot water. This is where the phrase hot water comes from. You're in hot water. Then he brings Hayosif Mar Ukva, Av based in Dichsiv, based David, Koyem Hashem, Dina Levake Mishpad, Vatzila, Gozel Miad Oishek, Pentese Ke'esh Chamasi, Yabarba, Ve'im Mechabe Plim Ram Aleim. These are very fighting words from the pasuk over here. Where is this pasuk? This pasuk is in Yecheskel. Now I get to the bit that I wanted to share with you. The next line is where it gets really, really interesting. For those of you who have a Gemara in front of you, once again, Nun Hey Amud Aleph, about 10 lines down, Amar Rav Zera le Rav Simain, Lukachina Mar Lahani de Beish Reish Galusay. Go and give Techacha to the Reish Galusay. And it takes guts. The Reish Galusay is the leader of your generation. Rav Zera obviously thought, this is out of my league. You, Rav Simain, you can do it. Amalei le mekabli minai. Here we have it. What happens if there's no one at the other end? This is very, 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 very problematic. He says, even although they're not going to listen to you, you have a mitzvah of techacha. Kadosh Baruch Hu makes a good gezerah. What will make him undermine his good gezerah? When he sees that the chachamim are not giving techacha. Tichsev, this is a pasuk in Yecheskel. V'yom Hashem elav avar b'teichei b'teichei shnayim. Whatever. This is already not important for us. How the psukim work. The Gemara goes on and brings down from the Malachim. So this is very, very, very serious stuff from Yecheskel against Rabbanim that can make a macha, and no one is listening, and they refuse to do it. We're talking about going to the Reish Galusa, telling off the leader of the generation and giving him techacha. Now, I would ask you, if we stop the Gemara now, read it kipshuto, it would come out that you have to give techacha, knowing full well that there's no one listening to you on the other side. So that means that today, 2023, you and I have to be giving techacha nonstop, because everyone is not going to listen to you. So comes Taisus, look at the Taisus, and says something that is clearly not the simple meaning in our Gemara. Look at the top Taisus over here, the famous Taisus. The Afagat, famous, my definition of famous means everyone quotes this. The Afagat v'le mikabel l'chachina, haine heichid esofik imekabel. When the Gemara says that they're not going to makabel, the Taisus says a chiddush in the words of the Gemara, it's a suffix that they're not going to makabel. How do I know? K'da'amar b'samach lifnei migalu avaheichid avade le mikabel hanach lehem mutiv sheyshegi v'al yemizidim. To read about maybe give the yaim a parak shel gabi tisefes yaim hakippurim. So we're gonna learn this together in a moment. But there's a mitzvah called Tisefes Yom Kippurim, which means there's a mitzvah that before Yom Kippur, you add a little bit of Yom Kippur to Yom Kippur. This is a din d'Rabbanan called Tisefes Yom Kippurim. The women of that generation would eat to the last moment. The Chacham of that generation should have made a macha, and they chose not to. Why? Because they're not going to listen. I'm going to switch them from shegig to mezid. So here you have a makar where the Gemara says we hold back from giving tochacha because there's no one listening on the other side. Women are not going to listen if you tell them that they can't eat to the last moment on Erev Yom Kippur. Says Tosfos that is halacha l'maisa. If that's halacha l'maisa, it's halacha l'maisa over here. Mutif yeshayim b'al yemizidim. So therefore, don't turn the reish galusa from a shegeg into a mezid if they're doing something wrong. So if you have a safek, says Tosfos, the Tosfos meanders and creates this compromise, that when you know Badai, they're not going to listen, keep your mouth shut. If you know 100%, then you're obligated. But you have a safek, even there, you should go ahead and make your macha. That is the shita of Tosfos. I'm looking at the clock over here, and I'm just going to say very quickly to the shita of the Rambam. There's a lot of diyukim in the Rambam, but I just, because the Rambam's so quoted over here, I'm just going to just say it over the bottom line over here. The Rambam, where would you find this Rambam on Tochacha? So the answer is in Hilchos Deis. This is where all these halachas appear. Perek Vav, you have 3 halachas in Zayin, Ches, and Tes. Mitzvah Tochacha, first of all, he gives the whole thing, that this is part of Binad Lachaverai, and he says, quote, Mitzvah Lachzirai Lemutav. Your job is to take your fellow Jew and bring him back to the right way. And then he adds the following words, which is all based on Gemara's Yidabale benachas ubelashain raka. So nachas, I imagine, is the style of speaking. Raka is the tone of voice. I'm doing this because I care about you. So at that point then, he realized he's not being attacked, he's being cared for. If your doctor called you up and says to you, you're eating poison, you're appreciative, that has to be the way you do it. And then he adds the following words, Lahaviyai l'chaya ha'olam haba. You have to tell him, I want you to get olam haba. Now I'm going to mention in a few minutes, because this is something that has changed, in my opinion. If people ask me, what are the basic changes that I've noticed in my career in KIRUV, is that when I first started doing KIRUV, I could talk about olam haba freely. But today, the world has changed. No one cares about olam haba. I'm going to get back to that in a moment. But the Rambam says is that this is the shocker. You're going to lose out on the world to come. Once upon a time, every single Jew wanted olam haba. Now, the Rambam goes on and brings, so this you're all familiar with, because you all know the Gemara in Baba Metzia, Daf Lamed Aleph, Lamed Aleph. I probably learned it with you, Reb David Shulman. You got to give tuchach again and again and again until the guy gets so angry that he hits you. So I don't know if he literally has to hit you. The Sefer Chinuch specifically says, quotes the same Gemara, and he says, ad b'lei ad b'kal, until he's about to hit you, so you don't actually get hurt. But the bottom line is that the Rambam comes out and he tells you that you have a mitzvah of tichach. He doesn't talk about what happens if no one's going to listen at all. His bottom line, his red line, is the guy gets mad at you and says, "Okay, I heard you the first 100 times. I heard you. You stop already." At that point, then he gets mad at you, and he could go violent. So that's the moment that you could stop. All the pasha says he gets violent. He doesn't talk about over here in Hilchos Deis about shegeg and mezid. That's only mentioned in the Hilchos Shvisas Asur, where he talks about the laws of Yom Kippur. There, he's talking about Beis Din have a mitzvah to give tochacha to the dar, and the example he gives is Tosefes Yom Kippurim, where you refrain from giving tochacha because all you're doing is switching them from shegeg to mezid. And then the Rambam adds the words "v'kein kol adayim lezeh," which is the way the Rambam is his style of writing means I said it here by Yom Kippur, I've said it everywhere. All kiyetz b'zeh, but it's a din in Hilchos Beisin. Those people have a chrayas for the door. Now, just hold that thought because I don't want to go into the Rambam because I want to. I'm just looking at the clock over here. I want to finish on time. The tochacha let's just summarize. What you need to know at this point now is the Tosfos. That is the key to our discussion over here. The Tosfos comes along and says that you have the following obligation: give tochacha, even if you have a suffix whether or not that someone's going to listen. So today you have over here. I see Reb Reuven is over here. Reb Reuven deals with a Masorti community, the Moroccan community. They're into what they're doing, but you have a suffix. There is people that are going to listen to you. They remember hearing the same points given to them by their Saba. So it's not completely foreign to them. There's a possibility that someone's going to listen. So there, Tosfos says, you have an obligation to go ahead and make it tochacha. And with that comes all the other things that are mentioned over here. You're punished if you don't. You are nitbas on what they do if you do not. Who's chaylik in Tosfos? The answer is the Nemuki Yosef and the Sefer Yereim. Let me read this here, the Nemuki Yosef. The Nemuki Yosef, by the way, is found in the Sugya in Yevamos. So, Perikvav, he says, and I quote, he says, Chayiv lechiach liyachid hachayte gam im barur shalei yikabel. Except for one t'nai, and that is if you're going to flip him from a shegi into a mezid. So he basically says that even if it's 100% dead ears, you're not going to change them. So you have an obligation to give techacha. And then he says that the whole phrase mutav sheyeshayigim is dafka when you're flipping them from shegi to mezid. The Sefer Yereim, with the Smag, by the way, is chaylik with the Sefer Yereim. The Smag is on the same side as Tosfos. He says, mitzvah laseis techacha afilu k'shaloi yishma shenema halitein l'rasha v'yamis. That's not good. Halitein l'rasha, even if it's the rasha, it doesn't make any difference to the Sefer Yereim. You have to go out and give a techacha. Honestly, it bothers me to no end. I couldn't find any rishon that clearly gives a difference between techacha and machal. I just want to interject. I was once sitting in a car with Ramesh Shapiro, and I asked him about this, about what does it mean to give machas. I live in Harnof. Every week, Rav Sternberg is giving a macha about whatever's going on. He's always giving machas. He's protesting to whoever wants to listen to me. Ramesh Shapiro once told me about Rav Shach. So I remember that when I was Yeshiva Bacha and Koil and all those years, so Rav Shach was the great giant of Klal Yisrael. He ran Klal Yisrael here in Eretz Yisrael. This was after it came Rav Aaron Leib. Today it's Rav Gershon. But once Rav Shach was massive. So Ramesh Shapiro told me that there's two types of letters that Rav Shach writes when he comes out with his fire against whoever's going on. There's a letter that he writes where he insists on winning. This is a war. Rav Shach's not going to give up. And there's another time where he writes a letter. He knows he's going to lose, but he wants, my opinion should be out there. Everyone should know my opinion. Some of you know about the whole controversy with Ma'arava. It was a yeshiva katana with secular studies of Rav Baruch Che. So Rav Shach wrote against it. Rav Shach also wrote about against Michala, where when I was teaching Michala, back in the day, he gave a thing because they were teaching Bible criticism. He wrote things knowing that no one would listen to him. It's possible with the art school Gemara. I don't know if you notice, every single gadol in Eretz Yisrael, and of course in America, gave haskamas except for Rav Shach. Rav Shach said someone should know that there's an old rabbi in Bnei Brak that holds that you should steig and push yourself to understand things your own without the crutch of an English translation. He knew he was going to lose, but he wanted his words out there. So there's such a thing as a macha. It's not exactly clear, even if no one's going to listen. Halitin l'rasha v'yamois. This is in Israeli politics. People people do it in the Aguda circles, not in the Ashkenazi. The literature yeshiva world never ever do this. We're going to see in a moment how it works out la halacha. Let me first quote you the Shulchan Aruch. Where is the sugya found If I would ask you, now you already know, but if you go and ask your chavrusa, where is the sugya of Tochacha found in Orach Chaim? Where is it found in the Shulchan Aruch? The answer is in Siman Taf Reish Ches, Halacha Beis, and Halachas of Sudas HaMafsekes. The Ramah paskins like who? The Ramah means Ashkenazi Psak. Okay, how does he paskin like? The Nemuki Yosef. So he says, he points out though, that the case over there was a Drabanan, and it was a case of Mutav Shishayim Al Yemazidim. He says, but Daraisa Moichim Biyadam, right? V'lo yedeh v'im lo yedeh she'ein devar of nishmoim lo yem barabim. Okay, but nevertheless, excuse me, he says barabim you should give Tochacha rak pam achas. Avol lo yarbe b'Tochachas ma'achas sheyodeh shelo yishmu. Al b'yachid chayv lechicha ad sheyakena or yikalelena. Until he hits you or he curses you. Barabim, you go out and make him a cha, knowing full well that no one's going to listen. We're not talking about Duraban, we're talking about Doraisa. This is what he said. Doraisa, you have a Chiyav Tochacha. Tesis is mashma that Chas v'Shalom, such a thing doesn't exist. Now, here you have the Ramah. The Ramah is Ashkenaz. Comes along the Bir Halacha, our very own Chafetz Chaim. He has two separate Bir Halachas over here that discuss this in great detail, and he's Chaylek with the Ramah, and he brings out Shitas Tesis and the Rishonim that back him up. Let me just read it to you. He starts off and quotes the Gra. The Gra says, we paskin like Tesis, against the Ramah who paskins like the Mukhi Yosef. And he says, Sha'peirik oil legamri, he says, already he's outside of Layatza, he's Yatza mitzmichal amisecha, which means there's such a thing called a peirik oil, which I'm going to summarize in a moment. I'm going to show you in a moment how all these things fit in 2023. The Gra says a peirik oil means that he's not amisecha. Amisecha means he's part of your he's a chaver. The Targum says chavercha an amisecha. If he's not part of the if he's put himself out, so then you have no mitzvah Tochacha. And then there's another Bir Halacha that quotes the Sefer Chasidim. He says that if Chas v'Shalom Tochacha creates Sina v'Nekama, you're not allowed to give Tochacha. Okay, so now I get to the fun part of the class over here. I've given you now the Mar Makamis and the Rishonim. Now I want to know, you and I, as KIRUV professionals, how my Rebbe hated that phrase. He says every Yid is a KIRUV professional. Every Yid, it's part of what we do. And all the other many mitzvos that we're not talking about today applies to every single Yid. Every single Yid has a Parshas Kadeshim where you had those 3 psukim that talk about achrayus to your fellow Jew. So how does this work, Lamaisa? And especially in our case, when we work with NCSY, so we have these cases all the time. So first of all, let's go back and talk about one category called a Rasha. So the classic case of the Rasha is Parsha Shemais Dasan Va'aviram. Moshe Rabbeinu gives Tochacha to Dasan Va'aviram. How do they respond? The first time we see such a Jew, Parsha Shemais, Klal Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, okay, Neida Hadava. Now I understand why we have so much SARS. Where Yid turns to Moshe Rabbeinu and Dasan and Aviram, and he says, well, you're giving us Musar. You're giving us Musar. We know what kind of Jew you are. We saw Halageina Ta'imer. We saw the violence you committed against an Egyptian. This person, these guys were Rishaim. They remained Rishaim until the final demise in the story of Kairach. So you got this one category. Now, comes along the Gemara in Erchin, Daf Tes Zayin, and quote, we mentioned this earlier on, but here's the full quote. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, Tomani, im yesh b'shudar hazeh mekabel techacha. At first glance, Rabbi Tarfon says, we were living in the dar of Rishaim. We're going to see in a moment, it's not Lab Dafka Rishaim. No one listens to Techacha anymore. It's the times of Rabbi Tarfon. And then our very own Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, who did not give Techacha on the cow of his neighbor, who was going around with a maser and didn't give Techacha, and it's called his cow, which is the way that we're punishing Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. The cow of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, they didn't give Tochacha on. He himself says, Tamei ani, if a person knows how to give, in your debt, the person knows how to give Tochacha. So no one can give Tochacha, no one else has to hear Tochacha. It gets worse. Let me read to you the Marshal. The Marshal already, we're going back 500 years. In Tshuva Kafhe, he says, Stam Adam Beinani. The average Jew that you meet, Stam Adam Beinani, he says you should know B'deris Acharayim, meaning the times of the Marshal. Marshal was B'pashtus, the last generation of Rishonim, or the first generation of Acharayim. He was that switch. If you remember, the Marshal is a firebrand. He never stopped from attacking his peers. He was fearless in how he spoke. He was fearless in how he spoke. He did not care. Today we just came out of Lag BaOmer. The Marshal says that we never paskin like Rav Shimon Bar Yochai from the Zohar, which is Kabbalah against halacha. And he says he writes in very, very stark terms. But the Marshal, and he was also the one that said, "Who on earth is this Beis Yosef that says that we paskin based on his big three, Mehechetesi, that he can bring the Rishonim to a close?" Marshal comes along and says, in Deris Achrayim, there's no one to listen to. And he says, every Stam Adam Beini, B'cheskas Shla Yishma L'Tichacha. Then also he mentioned the Gemara at the end of Seita. I don't know where you guys are up to in Daf Yomi, if you finished Seita yet, but at the very end of Tichacha, it says, Be'ikas V'shicha, says, Ve'ein Tichacha, and there's no Tichacha. So the Pashtus over there means there's no one to give Tichacha. But I understand it means that there's no one to receive Tichacha as well. The door is outside of the realm of Tichacha. So how on earth does this work out, lahalacha, lamaisa, for our generation? So I want to answer this with the Kli Yakar. I want to bring the Kli Yakar, sets the tone over here. The Kli Yakar on Hachiach Techiach, he divides those people to whom you should not give Techacha into three very convenient categories. It says Hachiach Techiach is Amisecha, Dafka Amisecha, Lafuke. He says the three kitos. What are the three kitos? She'enim kam Techacha, Rishaim, Silim, Leitzim. The Simancha Rachel, Leiselech Rachel. Rachel is Rasha, Sil, and Leitz. Then he brings down three psukim in Mishlei. So Mishlei, you paskin from a pasuk in Mishlei. One pasuk says in Perek Tes, O mechiach l'rashai mumai. Okay, you're just going to get into trouble. So who are the Rishonim in our generation? So my Rebbe Revolver says there's none. Our generation, there's no real Rasha. Dasan va'aviram does not exist today. Even those on the left wing of Israeli politics, they're not Rishonim. These are all Tinuk Shenishba, says Revolver. I'm not sure that my Rebbe Mishpir would agree, but Revolver said it several times to us, that in the last days, there's no real kafrim anymore. I remember my Mashkiach, Rabbi Asher Gruman, says that the last great kafir in Klal Yisrael was the father of the British Reform movement. He was a musmach of the Gateshead Yeshiva. He learned by all the Gedolim in England and Gateshead, and what was his name again? He wrote the book We Have Reason to Believe. I'm having a Biden moment. Baruch Hashem, I've forgotten his name, but he came along and he says, which he knew Kol HaTorah Kula, and he says now we're having a new Judaism. But since then, there's no Risham. Who's left? This we have a lot: Ksil and Letz. Mishlei Kaf Gimel, Ba'azni Ksil Al Tadaber. Don't try and tell of Ksil. Now, what's the definition of Ksil? This is how I understand it. Louis Jacobs, thank you. Louis Jacobs. Rosh Hashanah Grubenstein said that he's the only person that you're allowed to say the word Yimach Shemo. I don't like to use the word Yimach Shemo. I never saw my Rebbeim use it. Rav Shapir once told us that Rav Dessler once used the word Yimach Shemo on a certain early Zionist leader. He said it was frightening when he said it, because he said it with kavana, Yimach Shemai, about a certain Zionist leader. He didn't tell us who it was, but yeah, thank you. It was Louis Jacobs. Hey, Hashem Yerachim. Let's talk about Excel. And I mentioned this earlier, and I want to say this again. Once upon a time, I used to do discovery. I remember when I worked for Eshet Torah, then they were saying, don't mention the word Olam Haba. But the whole idea of discovery was to use logic and KIRUV. Prove there's a God. Prove that the Torah is Har Sinai, the Sefer Kuzari. If Hashem has Har Sinai, it couldn't be Olam Hazeh, therefore there has to be an Olam Haba. You can prove the Yud Gimel Ikram, basically, they all come out logically with a proper logical way of looking at the world. Today, it's all about feelings. You guys know what goes on. Please correct me if you're having a different experience where you are. If it's different in Ottawa, if it's different in Houston, Reb Nati, I don't know what goes on in your backyard. But I just know there's a famous clip on YouTube called It's Not About the Nail. It's 1 minute long. It's very cute. It's very funny. You see a woman, what you see, first you don't see it from the angle. She's like a huge nail coming out of her forehead. And she talks about the achy feelings that she has and how painful it is. And her husband says, just take out the nail. He says, it's not about the nail. And eventually he says to her, it must be so painful for you. And she says, thank you for understanding me. And the bottom line is that today it's not about the nail. No one wants to talk about Hashem and Olam Haba and proofs and logic. They want to feel good about their Yiddishkeit. So the greatest KIRUV tools that we have today is no longer what Ramesh Shapiro always spoke about, is sit down and learn with them. No, it's your kindlech at the Shabbos table and seeing your shalom bayis. This is what works for both women and men. So the whole world is what calls bechinas ksil. Ksil, tichacha doesn't work. And the lets, we certainly do have leitzim. Leitzim today are people who went to yeshivas a little bit. They learned for 1 year in the yeshiva somewhere. And they sometimes will have a blog and they criticize the Torah well. Yeah, there's no question that there are litzanim out there. But let's just summarize. Excel and Eletz, tichacha doesn't work. Now, what about our own students? So I'm going to talk fast because I see I'm running out of time. I want to say my own thoughts. In reality, each one of you, when it comes to a real life case, should use your own judgment or discuss it with your peers or your rebbeim, because these things are very tricky. But I've had this case several times, at least 5 times in my life. I've been very, very close to a boy or a girl that ends up intermarrying. So what are the rules I made for myself? So the first thing is that you can't speak to these people unless there's a pre-existing relationship based on what I call the big 3. I always talk about ahava, right? Love, respect, covered, and that they feel that you're not judging them. You're not judgmental. Those are the 3 things that everyone that goes out into KIRUV has to know how to do to their fellow Jew. Love, respect, and the feeling that you're not judging them. Then afterwards, you should, when you speak to them, you do it b'lashon raka v'divrei nachas. So the way you do it is that, for example, I would say to them, the most important thing I want is that you should be happy. And you can sincerely say that. And then afterwards you can mention, but you should know that because I care about you, I just want you to know my position. I want you to hear me through. And you say it. I've done this many times. Not once did they drop me the next day on their whatever, back in the day, Facebook, today, whatever, in their WhatsApp. It doesn't happen. Then, and this is, I wanted to finish off with this big idea. There's a chachma, which I call tangential to chacha. And I've seen this, everyone writes about this. I'm going to give you 2 examples, and with that I end. What does it mean, tangential to chacha? To chacha means I'm giving it directly to you. But if I don't give it to you, if I give it this way, and the third person hears, the person that you really want to hear, they hear, so that way you can be much more effective. So the Vilna Gaon, and this is Al Pi Shmuel, the Gra says on the pasuk in Mishlei, Perek Tes, pasuk Ches, Al Techiach Letz Pen Yisanecha. You give it to Chacha to a Letz, he's gonna hate you. Hachiach leChacham v'yavecha. Give to Chacha to the Chacham, he will love you. Says the Vilna Gaon, a chap. Give techacha to the chacham, and he will love you in front of the let's. Who's the one that will love you? The let's. In other words, don't give techacha and give techacha to a friend. And then he's going to hear, the guy's not telling me off, but I hear what he's saying. So he says, Kloima, gam l'chacham, ve'ema loy ki ein tzadik ba'aretz shalei yachta. We all sin, we're all humans, says the Gra. And then the let's is going to love you. He's going to hear you and say, you know what the guy says makes sense. Point is, the Gra says, is that figure out a way where the person, the recipient, does not feel attacked. Another example is the Kleisenberger and the alon that they gave out just now, the Shefa Chaim, he brings this down from the Talmudic Habesht. Heicheach techiach. Heicheach means give techacha to yourself, and then techiach, and through that there'll be techacha given to other people. You get up and say, I'm just talking to myself. He brings down the stories of Reb Zusha, that Reb Zusha used to go, the Heilige Reb Zusha used to go to an inn in his travels. He would look Baruch HaKadosh into the innkeeper and see Hashem Yerachem, this guy is terrible. And then he would go to his room and scream, Zusha, Zusha, how could you do such a thing? How could you serve, you Zusha, you serve your guests? You tell him it's kosher wine, it's not kosher wine. He would say all the chatoim until there would be a knock on the door and the innkeeper would come in bawling and saying, Rebbe, Baruch HaKadosh, how do I do tshuva? That is the genius of what's called tangential. What would it mean for me? So I'll tell you what has worked for me in the past. I will send my student a link to simpletoremember.com. Simpletoremember.com is a website that has a few excellent shiurim about intermarriage. I say to them, I says, look, I'm not telling you what to do, but for your own intellectual understanding of what is about to happen in your life, just hear the other side. Now, I'm not giving them the musar, I'm sending them to a website. So I found that has also worked for me. Have I stumped an intermarriage? So no one gave up on me. Once I had a girl, an NTS wire from Southern region. She married a Shegitz, and Baruch Hashem, my tefillas worked out, and he was abusive, and they got divorced, and now we're close again. And she's promised me that she's only dating Jewish boys. And at the moment now, it looks like she's about to get engaged to a Jewish boy. The bottom line is that with our tefillos and with the chachma of lashon racha and the idea of tangential and the idea of having a pre-existing relationship based on Ava, Hashem should give us the bracha that we can break up these awful ma'avids atzmul ladas, and as Hashem Yisbarach, we should be zeichet to see Yeshuas. Thank you, each one of you, for coming. It's a big covet for me, and we should be zeichet to makar the geula to the schus of our techachos that come from a makar of true Ava.